Death Stranding is a controversial game. To some, it's basically the messiah of modern video game entertainment. To others, it's a FedEx simulator that is atrociously boring. There's honestly a certain degree of merit to both of these claims. On the one hand, it contains some interesting narrative constructs. On the other, it literally has you deliver packages back and forth between outposts for 30 plus hours between lengthy cutscenes. But I'm not here to discuss the game itself. I've already done so in a dedicated review, which I'll link down below for anyone who cares. Today, I want to talk about score manipulation and review tampering. This will have a lot of speculation, so be warned, and shouldn't be considered accusatory. Instead, I'd like to frame this as a hopefully reasonable analysis of what can only be considered a giant question mark in the feedback process for this title, which has undeniably been manipulated to some extent. Let's start with what is proven. Yesterday, a user on Reddit by the tag argandg posted a thread documenting a drastic shift in the existing Metacritic scores. To be very clear here, I don't view Metacritic to be the end-all be-all of review systems. It's actually horrifically flawed because user accounts can be created to review a product that they have not actually played, and there is a total lack of platform integrations to check if they even own the title they are reviewing or scoring. That's a bad system. Something like Steam actually shows how long someone has played a title that they are choosing to score or review, and does not allow review of products that a user does not own. This is a far superior format, but Metacritic does not currently employ such methods, and I'm not exactly an expert on that type of integration, so who knows what the logistics are. But anyways, back on topic. Keeping this in mind and acknowledging the fact that Metacritic scores are far from a perfect game quality indicator, but still allow for some degree of value overall, let's read on. The post details how the Death Stranding scoring metrics were manipulated so as to remove over 6,000 negative scores, but leaving the positive and mixed ones relatively untouched. The decline amounts to about a 70% decrease in the negative scoring exclusively, and this also comes after a steady decline over recent weeks as more and more scores were submitted. The Purge facilitated a substantial increase in overall game score, from about a 5 to well over a 7, and requires the question to be asked, why were 6,000 plus negative scores purged while positive scores remained untouched? The easiest explanation, and one that makes a great deal of sense considering the intrinsic flaws Metacritic holds as a platform, is that there was a purge of fraudulent, spam, or bot score submissions. This makes sense, and even very early on during the game's launch window, it was clear that some users were review bombing the title for being a platform exclusive, or for political reasons. Take your pick, it certainly happened. However, this is not a one-sided phenomenon. If you go to Metacritic right now, after the removal of 6,000 possibly spam or fraudulent submissions, you can see the following. On November 8th, a user by the name Martin Chen 20 submitted a 10 out of 10 score with the following comment. Game of Century, best game I ever played. The game is simply a masterpiece with a lot of effort put into it. If you then peruse further entries, sort by different criteria, or change pages even, you can find something like this. User AllResApe submitted a 10 out of 10 score with the following comment. Game of Century, best game I ever played. The game is simply a masterpiece with a lot of effort put into it. Furthermore, clicking these profiles will show that they are not active Metacritic users. The only title that Martin Chen reviewed is Death Stranding, with an identical, right down to the grammar mistakes message to that of another user. It took me literally seconds to find this. The positive 10 out of 10 scoring is littered with fraudulent or botted scores and reviews, but these metrics remain untouched. This means that if the logic truly were to be centered on purging disingenuous scoring data, it is without question intentionally slanted. That's pretty much the end of what we know for a fact. As it stands, Metacritic purged about 70% of negative Death Stranding scores, raising it from a 5 to well over a 7. Now let's get into the speculation. Two shoutouts before we do that, Razorfist and Epime. Razorfist initially speculated on this topic, piquing my interest, and Epime helped locate the archives. The speculation, which I now find myself reluctantly agreeing with, is that these scores were taken down in a deliberately one-sided fraud purge at the behest of either Sony or Kojima himself. The reason for this dates back quite some time to a circumstance where a critical interview of Kojima himself was forcefully DMCA'd by the very company he was VP of at the time. The interview was done on a website called Hardcore Gaming 101 and featured Agnes Kaku, a prolific writer, consultant, and honestly a whole bunch of other things, but the most important one for today is writer. Agnes was interviewed regarding the work of Hideo Kojima, who was, at that point as well, considered a somewhat eccentric creative professional in the industry whose games were sparking polarized debate about whether or not they were genius or convoluted garbage. The archive of this interview can be found down below in the description on the Wayback Machine, and I'll spare everyone the pain and torture of just reading the entire thing verbatim, but here are a couple of quotes. I think he's very bad at character, and I think he's extremely conventional, as in non-creative when it comes to plotting. I know that I'll probably get an incredible amount of hate karma, can you say hate karma, about this, so I'll just say that I did grow up reading. I told you I grew up without TV, so I read instead. And I like Cormac McCarthy and the science fiction writers. I love Frank Herbert, I loved Alfred Bester. Right now I really like Greg Egan, so I'm extremely picky, and I do have a high standard when it comes to writing. I think that if you're ripping off Tom Clancy, it's Tom Clancy is Tom Clancy. He deserves all the money and fame. The guy has worked hard. Writing is hard work. So to shoot out a bunch of these kinds of things that we've been talking about and then claim yourself as a writer when, and you know, there's good work being done in games. I think Portal is really well written, very beautifully written. But Kojima's stuff is fine. Be a game creator and know what you're not very good at and learn to work with people who are. This is just one segment. The interview is lengthy, and having further researched Agnes, I can say that in terms of professional qualification, she is certainly one of what is very likely a small number of people who are perfectly positioned to have valid criticism of this nature. Well, this interview was forced DMCA'd at the highest rung by Konami. The logistics of how it even ended up on their radar appear to be somewhat complicated, and see the post being bounced around from 4chan over to another message board called 2chan, but regardless of how, it did end up on Konami's radar. The response was to very clearly execute a power move and go directly to the host/provider for Hardcore Gaming 101 with their legal team to cut the article down instantly and offer no recourse whatsoever. I'll link everything down below, including the Hardcore Gaming 101 summary of events as well, but the most important thing to note is that all this occurred while Hideo Kojima was in fact the vice president of Konami, which leads me to speculate, and again this is speculation, that he was somehow personally involved, or at the very least knew of the events and allowed them to unfold. On the most fundamental level, this is a major corporation brute forcing a takedown of what is really just a simple interview that was critical of their vice president and his writing. That kind of behavior by itself is already unacceptable. And even if we nuke the speculation and for the moment pretend that the VP of Konami had no idea any of this was taking place, as an article heavily critical of his own writing skills got slashed from the public eye, it still forces the question, why are 70% of the unfavorable Metacritic scores being wiped out when Konami has no tie to the product whatsoever, but Kojima still does, now being the chief architect behind it? Again, this speculation would be entirely unfounded had the blatantly fraudulent positive reviews been purged alongside everything else, but the sheer proportion of negative coverage deletion, combined with the fact that these reviews did not simply explode onto the site during a confined period, something which is typically the format when a game gets legitimately review bombed, makes it impossible not to speculate. The reviews accumulated at a decently stable rate for weeks, slowly overtaking the positive coverage, and this would track quite well with average player time allocation when we factor in the relative length of Death Stranding and the fact that most players don't sit down and grind it all out in a week or two. Put that on top of the fact that the positive scores and even mixed scores were totally untouched, and the historical reference of an innocuous interview critical of Kojima's writing ability having been DMCA'd while he was VP of the company taking it down, and it creates an atmosphere I find to be extremely suspect. Death Stranding is a controversial game. It has faced skewed negative and positive coverage from various different outlets for a variety of separate reasons, but setting aside my own feelings, which mainly revolve around gameplay flaws, not narrative ones, owing to how subjective narrative elements often are, it still becomes very hard to picture a scenario wherein this score manipulation is anything other than a very deliberate and probably requested action. I'm very well aware that this video will spark the ire of many Death Stranding fans, but I want to once again make it clear that the manipulation of Metacritic scores is not an actual reflection on the game itself. If you like it or don't like it, that's okay. My goal is merely to cover an event that is extremely suspect, i.e. 70% of only the negative scores getting purged, while 5 seconds of research will prove that many of the positive reviews are flat out spam from fake accounts. It's conspiratorial, but let's be honest, based on the recent industry track record, especially in the area of review consistency or credibility, conspiratorial is fast becoming the new normal. But that's it. If you want to support, there are links down below, basic stuff, merch, Patreon, Twitter, etc., but I'll cut it there and stop rambling. As always, thank you all for watching. Grab a limited edition UEG ugly sweater if you want one, link in the description. They're going to be gone soon, but yeah, have a nice night.